Welcome back to Cars_Mad.
Yes, we are very excited to be back and to be producing more content. We're trying to put out a few things each week, and hopefully you can tune into them and you're enjoying them. But today we've actually had this requested of us. It's a video that someone wrote in that they wanted to see, and so we're going to be talking about
The different types of engines and different layouts of engines. So we're going to start with probably the most basic one. But before we do, make sure you subscribe.
always subscribe, always like, always comment. If you don't like it, like the video anyway. And make sure you subscribe, even if you hate our stuff. You want to make sure you know when the video drops so you can watch what you hate, right? So subscribe, like, and comment. Let's continue on.
Yeah,
the most
so-
basic engine type is
Inline.
an inline engine.
Inline engines, there are inline 4s and inline 6s. Some inline 5s and inline 3s. So an inline engine has four. Let's start with an inline. Let's use an inline 4. So it has 4 pistons that go up and down, and they're all straight. They're all straight up and down pistons. And as the crankshaft spins around, they go up and down. And okay, so let's start with like how a 4-stroke engine works. So the piston comes down, the valve opens, and the piston sucks air in through the valve. And then the valve closes and it pushes up with a fuel mixture, and it ignites it at the close to the top dead center, which is when it's at the very top before it starts coming back down.
And them being the most
So
basic.
so it sparks, and then it pushes the piston down, which creates the power stroke, which spins the crankshaft, and then it comes up and pushes the exhaust out. The exhaust valve, because the exhaust valve opens as it's coming up, which is 4 strokes. You have intake, compression, spark, or power stroke, and then the exhaust stroke, 4 strokes. So an inline engine has however many cylinders, and they're doing that. So the way, let's start with an inline 3. You have a bit of gap between the firing, between power strokes. So there's times when the crankshaft is not being pushed. So it can be a little bit unbalanced. It creates a unique kind of sound. And then the inline 4 engine has it has no gap between power strokes, so there's always a power stroke happening, basically. So with an inline 4, you have 2 pistons moving at the same time. One is on power stroke when they're moving down, and the other is on intake stroke. So imagine you have these 2 like here that are moving down together, right? They're moving down together, and one is being pushed down by the power stroke and the other is taking in air. Which means it's very balanced and very quite smooth engine, because there's always a power stroke. And then in inline 5, you have a bit of overlap, but an inline 6 is probably the most balanced, because you have 3 sets of 2 pistons that are synced, except that the synced pistons, one is doing a power stroke, one is doing an intake stroke at the same time. And then, so that's the inline engine, and the inline 6 is very balanced. Some of the most legendary engines of all time are inline 6s. The Barra, RB26, and the 2G. So, yeah, they are.
And as you said, the inline is probably the most basic engine.
Most
Is
basic.
it the most common as well, would you say?
Not these days. I mean, the inline 4 is an extremely common engine. But I would say that V engines are probably getting very common.
Yeah, okay.
So,
And what about, obviously a lot of people are worried about engines having issues because it's a very expensive thing.
Yeah.
In terms of all the engines, does being basic mean that there's less issues that come up?
not necessarily less issues that come up, but parts will be cheaper generally, and they're less complex. And also, because when you have an inline engine, everything's around the engine. It's pretty easy to work on generally.
Yeah, great.
So an inline engine is a pretty good way to go.
Mm-hmm.
So then onto the V engine, you have two. So you on a V engine, so a V6, let's say, because there aren't really V4s except on motorcycles.
Mm-hmm.
So V6s, imagine you have two pistons on the same. So you have the two pistons that are going up in a V shape like that, and then you have like on the crankshaft, they're basically connected at the same point. So as the crankshaft spins, one goes down and the other goes up on this, and they're basically on the same crankshaft section of the crankshaft, like the same little bit of the crankshaft. And the cylinders are slightly spaced out like that, but not hugely spaced out. So a V6, let's say, you have they're pretty good. They're not as balanced as an inline 6,
Mm-hmm.
which does mean that they do need some kind of counterweights. So a counterweight is basically to counter the movement of the piston, because the piston is kind of hard, which is why V engines often don't rev quite as high, because they can't really, their pistons, they're just not as well balanced.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some great V engines out there, like the VG30 DETT, which was in the 300ZX Z32, which is a great engine. It has 300 horsepower. And V engines are generally more powerful and easier kind of to get power out of.
Well, that's what they're kind of known for, right? When you hear someone speed off, you go, oh, is that a V8, is that a V6? People know the V engines for their power.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the drawing card.
And, I mean, there's not really like inline 8s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is another engine type which we're not going to discuss today, but if you want to see a more in-depth one on a rotary engine, like in the Mazda RX-8, RX-7s, those cars, if you want to see an in-depth video, let us know in the comments and maybe we'll make one for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think that would be an interesting video, just not, gonna really fit in this video. But if you want to see a separate one on that, let us know. So the V engine, so like a V8, you have two different types. You have crossplane, where the piston connecting points are spaced 90 degrees around. So imagine you have like one over here, and then you have one here that is like a cross, but it looks like a cross because you have them moving along the crankshaft. Like you have one, but they're twisted at 90-degree separate angles.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way a crossplane, and they're like American V8 kind of things. And then you have a flat plane crank, which is in like Italian, European kind of cars, and that means that they're spaced 180 degrees apart, which is more balanced, and it gives you a more high revving V8 engine. So in cars like Ferraris, Lamborghinis, that kind of car. So then you have a V12, which is very smooth, because as we said before, an inline 6 is one of the smoothest engines you can get. But a V12 is basically two inline 6s, but on an angle. Mm-hmm. So there's two different types of V engines. There's 90-degree V engines, which are 90 degrees apart, like that. And then you have 60-degree engines, which are closer together. Volkswagen also make VR engines, but we're not going to get into them right now, which are kind of closer together V engines, so that they can put them in things like Golfs.
Mm-hmm.
So V12s are very, very smooth, and they're in Lamborghinis and premium brands like that. Like, you pretty much won't find a budget V12 car. So
yeah, in general, the V engine's more expensive than inline, just
to produce.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say they are, because the inlines have slightly less parts. So there's different. Yeah, so there's different amounts of cylinders, but there is one crazy one, which is a W16, which is what Bugatti has in some of their cars. So the W engine, basically, you have two V engines. So imagine this is a V engine. It kind of goes like that, so it's kind of mounted like that. So you have 4 banks of cylinders all connected to one crankshaft. And they have like an 8 litre W16 quad turbo engine, which they used in their Veyron and Chiron. Anyway, so that is a crazy type of engine. So then we have boxer engines or flat engines. So they're not interchangeable terms. Like a boxer, all flat engines are boxers, but not all boxers are flat engines. But so the way it works is they're also called horizontally opposed engines. So they basically have two pistons that move away from each other on the same crankshaft, and one's moving. So imagine these are the two pistons. Imagine the connecting rods are like here, and then the crankshaft is in the middle. So imagine they move away from each other like that. And whilst one is, so you have different styles of boxes, very common in Subarus and Porsches. But they have very good things. Like they're okay. They're kind of harder to work on, but they do have a unique sound. They're very common in Subarus, boxer engines, and they're pretty good. So basically, there's not really such thing as a boxer 8-cylinder. There's 4 cylinders, like in the Subarus. And I mean, I'm sure you could make a 2-cylinder, but why would you do that, really? You could make an 8-cylinder one, but it won't fit in many cars because they're very wide.
Right. So they're actually bigger, because I guess if they're moving away
well, they're
from
not technically bigger, but they are very wide. But they're very low down, which gives you a low center of gravity, which is why Subaru uses them. They're slightly harder to work on, like changing spark plugs on one is a pretty big job in the car, which is ridiculous.
Yeah,
because that's like the most basic job.
An inline engine, it would be very easy, right? So,
or even a V engine, but they're good engines. I think that they can be super reliable. One thing that you do have to watch out for with a boxer engine is, like with the Subaru ones, use genuine Subaru coolant. You need one that has the correct corrosive properties, anti-corrosive properties, because the coolant, because the engine's basically sideways, the coolant's always sitting in the head, which can corrode the head gasket if it isn't anti-corrosive coolant. Which is why Subarus are known for head gasket problems. But if you just use genuine Subaru coolant, then they will be fine. But boxers can make a bit of power. Probably not quite as good as a inline or a V, but they are still good engines, and especially like when they come from a good manufacturer. So there aren't many boxes around, but there are boxes around. So anyway, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like. If you think we missed the type of engine, then let us know in the comments.
Absolutely. And how about you go and check your car? If you don't know what type of engine you have, go and have a look. See what's inside your car and let us know. Is it inline, a V, a boxer, or something else?
Also, you can go follow us on Instagram at _cars_mad. That's enough for today. See you next time.